Good morning, everyone. Just letting you know that we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Please sit tight while we wait for everyone to join. Okay, it looks like we have enough people who have joined us now, so we can make a start. It's great to be with everyone today to have a chat about something that's ever prevalent in the modern workplace, which is the management of psychological and psychosocial hazards and risks. My name's Adrian Turner. I'm the head of Citation Safety and General Counsel at Citation Group. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Dr. Natalie Flatt, who is a genuine expert in this space, being a psychologist and the co-founder of Connect Psych Services, who Citation's recently partnered with in a really exciting partnership that will take everyone through today. Natalie's from a psychology management background, and her passion lies in the early identification and intervention in that space. Her career has seen her move more into corporate wellness and create an innovative solution in Connect Psych, which supports employees, leaders, and teams from all industries to highlight the importance of self-care, stress management, and communication around that. So we feel it's a really natural partnership with our own services, and we're really excited to be announcing some really innovative offerings in this space alongside Nat and the team. Welcome, Nat.
Thanks for having me, Adrian. Hi, everyone.
Okay, so just before I dive in today's presentation, I just wanted to cover off on some general housekeeping rules. If you have a question during the webinar, please just use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to answer them at the end of the presentation. You don't need to wait until the end. You can type them throughout the webinar, and we'll try to get to them towards the end. The webinar is obviously recorded, and you'll be sent a recording link after the session. And so just to back over who we are and what we do at Citation Group, we've been working with Australian and New Zealand businesses for over 30 years to provide workplace compliance solutions that really help businesses create better workplaces for their people. And so you've seen a snapshot on the screen at the moment of our core brands, which provide outsourced HR and safety management solutions, ISO certification services, legal and migration services as well. We really are a one-stop shop, if you like, when it comes to workplace compliance. So if you'd like to talk to us after today's webinar about the content of today's session, but certainly any of the aspects of the services that are on your screen at the moment, please do use the QR code options that we're going to provide for you throughout the session, or just get in touch with us through other means that you might have available, such as emails or telephone calls. Just to focus on our offering as it relates to today's presentation, I lead Citation Safety, which is a low-cost compliance services for business in respect of workplace health and safety obligations. As we'll go through today, work health safety compliance is a really onerous position for any business and the individuals within it. There really is no bigger concern for any business owner than one of your own people being injured on the job. And what follows that is an extremely punitive penalty regime that can put businesses out of action when things go badly wrong. And so our service is designed to help businesses get the basics of compliance right at a low cost, keeping people safe most importantly, but protecting you from the ever-growing compliance risk as well that comes alongside it. And so with our core safety offering, we're very excited today to be announcing an exciting psychological specific offering, and we'll take you through in a bit more detail what that looks like today. And I encourage all of you to reach out and following the presentation and just discuss how we can help you with whatever work health safety compliance challenge you're facing at the moment, but certainly specifically in relation to the psychosocial or psychological space that we'll be talking to you about today. So just in terms of today's session, what are we going to be talking about? I'm going to take everyone through a really quick refresher on the workplace health and safety law and jurisdiction, i.e. what is the jurisdiction that you're required to comply with in this space. We'll give you an overview of the specific psychosocial and psychological hazards and risks and how they manifest in the workplace. We'll give you some understanding of how you identify those psychological hazards and risks in the workplace and how you manage or control those injuries or injuries that result from those hazards occurring, as well as obviously the ramifications of a psychological injury on your business and your people, as well as practical and best practice systems and processes that help reduce all of those risks and protect your people, and how we obviously partner with businesses to help you do that. So with that, I'll try to crack into it. So just to take everyone through what exactly we're talking about when we think about compliance as it relates to psychological or psychosocial hazards. We're talking about state-based work health safety legislation. That is the Work Health Safety or Occupational Health and Safety Act in each state and territory, which each business must comply with. The most fundamental concept in work health safety law that I'm sure all of you have heard of before is that you have a legal duty of care to ensure the safety and well-being of people within your workplace. And so this is really the primary legal responsibility that overarches everything in the work health safety space, and all of the responsibilities and obligations that we'll talk through today and that you have under the work health safety law fall out of that duty. So critically, for the purpose of today's discussion, the Model Work Health Safety Act defines health as including both physical and psychological health. And these psychological issues have come really, and from a practical point of view, to be referred to almost interchangeably as psychosocial issues. And so a PCBU, which is a term I'll get to in a second, must ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, that workers and other persons in the workplace are not exposed to risks to their health and safety on the basis of psychological or physical health and safety. So the business must eliminate psychosocial risks in the workplace. And if that's not reasonably practicable, you have to minimize those risks so far as reasonably practical. And so the work health safety regulations now include specific requirements for PCBUs to manage risks arising from psychosocial hazards. So under the regulations, the business must identify the reasonably foreseeable hazards that could give rise to a psychosocial risk, eliminate those risks so far as reasonably practical. If it's not reasonably practical to eliminate the risk, minimize the risk so far as reasonably practicable, and maintain implemented control measures so that they remain effective, and review and revise those control measures as is necessary. And so all of that really is to say that a business now has a duty under the work health safety legislation to protect employees from these risks and hazards occurring. And to the extent that you don't, you can face harsh penalties and that whole compliance regime. And that's what everything we're talking about today, how it fits in with why you must do things and the services that we provide businesses to help you do that. Okay, so I'm sure most of you are aware at some broad level of the concepts on this slide. And these are really the main classifications of persons within a workplace under work health safety law. And they've each got differing responsibilities and liabilities attached. And so the three categories are PCBUs, officers, and workers. I think it's really important that we can all recognise who is who in our business so that we can properly understand who's responsible for what, and importantly, where the respective liabilities lie in relation to things that you might not do. And so a PCBU, first and foremost, is a person conducting a business or undertaking. And in its purest form, the PCBU is the business. It can be an organisation, it can also be an individual, so long as that individual is conducting the business in their own right. So think of a sole trader or a self-employed person. And so the PCBU, which I appreciate is a bit of a mouthful of a word, but if you think about it pure and simply as the business, the PCBUs are the ones that have a legal duty to ensure the health and safety of workers so far as reasonably practicable. I'll get to the importance of that phrase in a moment, but really it's important that whenever we talk about a PCBU or any obligation under the Work Health Safety Act, principally it's talking about the business. What must the business do in order to comply with the Work Health Safety Act? It's the PCBU who has that primary duty of care. Below the PCBU or the business are what's called officers. And so officers are the people in the business who exercise a high level of influence or control over the business's operations. Typically, it's the business owner, C-level executives, managers, senior supervisors, or even senior HR employees. And so officers have individual duties to exercise what's called due diligence to ensure compliance with work health safety obligations. And so officers are the ones within the business who have a responsibility to ensure that the PCBU has done all of the things that it's required to. And so I like to say that the officers are the people who the law requires stand in the shoes of the business and make sure that the business does all the things that it's required to do. Obviously, a business isn't a living entity. And so if it's got the obligations under the law, who are those people that are going to stand in the shoes and make the business do all the things that it has to do? And the most important thing to think about with officers, and many of you in the room will be officers for the purpose of your business, is you have individual liability in this space. So what that means is not only when things go wrong can the business be penalised, the individual, who is the officer, can have individual fines and other penalties, and in this jurisdiction, even at the absolute worst, go to jail, as it's a criminal jurisdiction, which we'll get to in a second. And so workers are the third category, and of course they are effectively employees or contractors to the extent that they're working on a particular site. They have duties themselves in respect of health and safety and to maintain the health and safety of themselves as well as others in the workplace. But really critically, when we're talking about compliance throughout the presentation, and really generally speaking as it relates to work health safety, we're talking about the obligations of the PCBU, the business itself, to discharge its duty of care. But it is important to be able to recognise who these three entities are and where all of their liabilities and obligations lie. Okay, quickly to touch on this concept of reasonably practicable, I think it's critical for anyone who's running a business to understand this, because it's the standard for how far the business and individuals need to go in order to discharge their work health safety duties. It essentially means doing what you're reasonably able to in order to ensure the health and safety of workers. And so we've mentioned that PCBUs always need to try and eliminate, so far as reasonably practical, any health and safety risk. But if the risk can't be eliminated altogether and you have to keep working, or the workplace requires that risk be continued to work through, the obligation then shifts down to mean that you have to try and reduce it so far as reasonably practical, so that there's not an unreasonable risk to someone working on the work site. And so, as I alluded to, what is considered reasonably practical in any one instance really turns on, pardon me, the facts of the particular circumstances. And so it takes into account, okay, what was the likelihood of that hazard or risk occurring? What was the degree of harm or possible consequences of that risk? The state of knowledge in the business about that risk. How much did you know about it? The availability and suitability of ways of eliminating. And so effectively what the person in the PCBU knows or ought to reasonably have known about that risk and the ways to eliminate it. So it's really important throughout this presentation, and when you're thinking about health and safety generally, that if something were to go wrong, someone's injured at work, so for instance, a psychological injury occurs, the business's liability will be assessed as to whether or not they did things that were reasonably practical to have prevented that injury. That is, did you try enough? Did the business do enough to protect or prevent that injury from occurring? That's always the standard that you're going to be held to. It's always about what was reasonable. Did you see it coming? Were there things in place to have prevented it? If you did nothing and it could have been stopped, in effect, then you'll be held liable, and there'll be issues for the business in respect to the compliance regime. So really important to always think about things through that lens. Okay, so the penalty regime, which is a confronting thing to think about, particularly for any business or any individual on the session who is an individual director or officer of a business, like we mentioned. Whenever we're discussing work health safety compliance, it really needs to be done having regard to the immense penalty regime that is enforced in this space and the fact that work health safety is a criminal jurisdiction. So the sheer scale of the penalties that stem from non-compliance really can be cataclysmic for a business, with maximum penalties well up into the millions of dollars, and individual fines and penalties highly significant as well. I also want to touch on what is in addition to the work health safety regime, and that's the possibility for action in relation to injuries under other jurisdictions. So claims under the Fair Work Act, Discrimination Act, of course, workers' compensation claims that can arise from psychological injuries in the workplace are probably more prevalent and probably the ones that many of you have actually seen in the workplace. And the reason that is so is because these are the areas that are compensable to the employee. What that means is the employee suffers an injury and they seek compensation for that injury occurring. That happens under jurisdictions other than the work health safety jurisdiction. So the work health safety jurisdiction is concerned with a regulator enforcing penalties on the business itself, not for those penalties to be paid to the employee. So when we think about injuries occurring, and specifically for the purpose of today, psychological injuries occurring, you need to think about them in all the different ways they can harm you as a business, as well as obviously the injury to the employee, which is something that you never want to have happen on your watch. You've got an instance where the employee has not only can the work health safety regulator prosecute you, you've also got the employee raising claims, either a workers' compensation claim, i.e. they make a claim for compensation for which you're insured for, or they make some other type of claim for damages, for instance, under a discrimination act or something like that. And so many different ways that these things can hurt you. Helpfully, I guess, if you can think of it that way, the things that we'll talk to you about today that protect you from the liabilities attached under the Work Health Safety Act. So identifying hazards and risks and controlling them so far as reasonably practicable. They are the very same things that put you in a really good stead and in a defensible position were those claims, that other types of claims brought by the employee under those other jurisdictions. So lots of different ways that you can be harmed as a business, but helpfully, the practical things that we'll talk about today are the very things that should protect you should any of those injuries occur. Okay, so I'm going to throw it over to my expert in Dr. Natalie Flatt, who's going to take you through exactly what psychosocial or psychological hazards are and how they come about in the workplace.
Thanks, Adrian. And look, you're right. Like there has been a huge increase between in psychological injury and the claims. And Allianz data recently has been showing there has been a 46% increase in these claims. So certainly an area that's creating a lot of angst for many organisations, but also then a lot of angst for the employees, because we want work to be a good place, don't we, Adrian? We want work to be good for us. So we really want to be able to do right for our people. But this is a term that is still very new to many organizations, and it is, I would say, it's a little bit of a scary term as well. We have a lot of businesses that we work with that are a bit taken aback by what does this actually mean. So let's look at the definition again of what Comcare is defining psychosocial hazard in the workplace, and this refers to elements within the work that's related to how we design our work, how that's then organised, but more importantly, how it's managed, as well as the social and then also the environment and the context in which the work occurs. So we know nowadays, with the modern way of working, it is very different to what we had even 5 or 7 years ago. Well, we actually have a lot more risks, and we have to look at the, as business owners, we actually have to look at many different other angles that these psychosocial hazards can rise from. But these hazards, what they're pointing to is if they have the potential to cause psychological and even physical harm to employees, so impacting their mental health and well-being and overall job satisfaction, this is where the risk can start to increase. So some of the common examples that we see and we work a lot with includes the high job demands, the low control, poor support, supervision, bullying and harassment, role clarity. So let's go and actually go through some of these now in greater detail and how they then typically manifest also in the workplace here. So let's start with the role overload. So the high work loads and the high job demands. So this often results in the excessive workload, the tighter deadlines that we can all feel like we are under, but the high pressure environments. This can then lead to a high level of stress, burnout, vicarious trauma, and other types of fatigue. And this can also then lead as a consequence to the poorer workplace relationships and overall job satisfaction here. So what we can see, this is a very common one where we feel especially, in the SME space, that we're continually on. We have enough technology and capability to allow us to be continually on or to have that urgency. But this can result in a very easy snowball effect. So something that needs to be monitored, and we'll go into some of those strategies in a moment. But also then we can see the low job control. So we see this a lot in job roles that are quite highly repetitive or may not be using a lot of cognitive capacity here. So this is where also there may be some limited level of autonomy and also decision making with their level of power about how they can control their job. And this can make employees feel really helpless and also really dissatisfied, and that contributes to stress and also that disengagement there. We can look at exposure to traumatic events. And that is, again, very obvious there that we're seeing a lot of that again in a lot of the frontline work that we come across within industry. And that also then includes retail and education, but also again in transport and healthcare. So continually being exposed to traumatic events without any proper follow-up and debriefing and any formalized critical response can lead to a lot of stress, vicarious trauma, and distress in employees there. Lack of role clarity. So it occurs when roles and responsibilities or expectations can be unclear, inconsistent, and then also then frequently changing there. So this is going to lead to a lot of teams or staff feeling quite confused and frustrated, and also then start to display some stress amongst the employees, as well as, we can start to see that anxiety build from a lack of, probably more so a lack of understanding about where they actually are placed within an organization. Next, we then have the low, sorry, I've just already said the low job control, sorry, the conflict or poor workplace. So this is really around the relationships between the workers and their supervisors. So is there a lot of signs of conflict? Is there, is it because there's personality clashes? Is it because, again, where we may actually feel that there might be a level of organizational injustice? And how are the co-workers responding to this? And if we can continue to ignore it and think that that's actually, it's going to get better or things are going to settle down, it may not. It actually might build. This can lead to a lot of resentment, a lot of, again, job dissatisfaction, but the workplace relationship breakdown can then lead to, more so those claims that can be pushing more towards the bullying side too. Poor support is from management, from leaders or from colleagues. It can really cause those feelings of isolation within an employee, and that can then lead to stress and also that reduced morale. And, we can also see that within our co-worker support. So if we feel that we're doing a good job, even as a teams, but our co-workers are not being able to support us or feel that they have the opportunities to support us, again, depending upon the way that the organisation is laid out, the environment of the organisation, this can then lead to a lack of purpose and identity within a workplace. Leading into it, so they're really the main ones, but we actually have a lot of other of the 14 psychosocial hazards that Comcare have identified. But looking then at the workplace violence and aggression. So this is any incident where a person feels abused or threatened or assaulted. So very clear here, and it can have severe physical and psychological consequences, and which really includes the long-term mental health issues like anxiety and PTSD. So it's a very black and white risk there, and this is increasingly, from the claims that we are seeing when we work with the likes of insurers around psychological injury, that these are the employees that really are having the most impact on workplaces. And that also goes with bullying. So very self-explanatory in that area, but this is is this through manifesting through persistent negative behavior. And this then leads to the anxiety and the depression and decreased productivity of the recipient, along with increased absenteeism. Now, some of them that may not be as obvious as a psychological hazard or a risk is the inadequate reward and recognition. And this involves really an imbalance between the effort the workers can put in and the recognition or rewards that they actually end up receiving. And when employees feel their efforts aren't properly recognised, this can lead to feelings of feeling, being devalued and feeling quite disengaged, but also burning out because they feel that they may need to up their game, or that there could be some level of assumption that they're not doing enough. So again, it can then start to connect into high workload or high when they believe that high job demand there, they can start to put a lot more pressure upon themselves. Hazardous working environments, from a physical aspect, is again something that we're very attuned to. And we've had some great positions in place. But what people, what workplaces also need to recognise is this can also be very connected to low job control. Because there's a lot of evidence around that when there is low job control, our workers actually are more likely to daydream. And when our workers can daydream, it can actually lead to negative cognition. And negative cognition that can then start to increase the anxiety and the stress. What that can do is start to create a level of distraction. And when we see levels of distraction, we can actually start to create some more accidental or some mistakes that can occur. Now, when you're actually around hazardous machinery, this can be a very obvious risk to many workplaces there. So there's the connection there. Remote or isolated work, what this does here, it increases the risk related to physical and psychological health because it's got the absence of immediate support here. And this can potentially also then lead to loneliness, relationship breakdown, and increased stress, along with symptoms of depression. Yeah. We also then have the organisational justice here, and this refers to that lack of fairness in procedures, and then also the information distribution that some workplaces might be providing a lot more information, again, just because it could be the way that the environment has been created, but this actually can start to feel that there's a level of imbalance in understanding the workplace and the changes that the workplace might be owning here, and this can then break down those interpersonal interactions. Then that can actually lead to, again, resentment and that decreased morale, along with some psychological distress. And last but not least, we look at the poor organisational change management. Now, we know that there's a lot of organisations that have gone through a lot of change, and being able to express this and talk to your staff about it. It can be tricky, especially if you've got a dispersed workforce. But when there's levels of change management where workers actually feel like they're not gathering enough information, and again, there is a lack of clarity about what's going on and what systems need to be used and which procedures we're following now, that can actually lead to a significant rise in distress. So they're the 14 psychosocial hazards there, Adrian, that from a high level of describing and then how they manifest in those workplaces. I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Nat. So, as I mentioned earlier in the session, we have something exciting planned in this space. So before I just carry on with the presentation, I just want to let everyone know what that is going to look like at a high level. What Nat took you through is the myriad of ways in which these types of hazards can crop up in the workplace. And so when they do, it immediately creates a corresponding compliance risk. So you're dealing with an injured employee who has suffered that injury in your workplace, and the effects that can have on anyone in a business is obviously quite high, especially the owners of business, who it kind of happens on your watch. But then you're also dealing with the compliance risk that can seriously damage your business from a financial standpoint, reputationally, and in all sorts of other ways. And so with the ever-increasing regulatory or enforcement approach that's been adopted by WorkSafe, there is an increased spotlight in this area. And so it's important that you're protected and you're ready for that. And so that people aren't getting injured in your workplace, but you're also able to demonstrate that you took the required steps, or that you've been doing what's reasonably practicable to prevent those injuries happening in your workplace. And so we are launching a solution for businesses in partnership with Connect Psych Services, whereby we'll first help you identify those hazards that Nat has taken you through in your workplace. Are they around? How are they relevant to your workforce and your workplace? We'll provide you with a report and recommendations as to how you can address them with our assistance, and provide you with ongoing advice as to how you manage those hazards and risks and how you keep people and your business safe. And we also have an EAP service delivered through Connect Psych Services, which is a fundamental component of any compliance or any system for managing work health safety risk. As it's one of the things that Safe Work will almost always inquire as to whether you have when they come and inspect you, or that there's an injury that occurs in the workplace, i.e., what are the control measures that you have in place to help control these risks from manifesting. One of those absolutely critical ones is a EAP service for your employees, i.e., do they have somewhere to go to talk about and get assistance, clinical assistance from experts who can help them through those situations. And that's a solution that we're going to be providing alongside the hazards, the identification and the management of those hazards and risks specifically. And so I encourage everyone to use the QR code that's going to be on the screen there to talk to one of our advisors, and we can talk you through how that solution works, how it might pair with our broader work health safety solution, and how we can help you as a business better understand this space and feel more comfortable that you're ready to comply and able to comply with the the onerous obligations of the work health safety jurisdiction's demands. Okay, so I won't dwell on this case too long, other than to say that it's an example of the different ways in which psychological injuries manifest in the workplace can damage your business. And the reason I say that is that it's not actually a work health safety case, it's a workers' compensation case. So I mentioned at the start of the presentation that there's a variety of ways in which these types of injuries can harm business. One of the ones that most of you will be familiar with is a work health safety, is a workers' compensation claim. And that's because it's compensable to the employee. And so, as I mentioned, though, the types of things that we'll talk about, and I'll talk through specifically in a second around what you're supposed to do to comply with work health safety, are the types of things that the business didn't do adequately in this case that led to a workers' compensation claim being approved, and led to a pretty damaging situation, all things considered, for the business in relation to the psychological injury that had occurred. And so the case involved an employee of a government agency whose tenure spanned over 2 decades. They had been temporarily promoted for a 12-month period. He later spent 6 months working under the supervision of a remote manager. So the employee was in Sydney while the manager was in Melbourne. The manager would usually communicate with the Sydney team via phone calls, emails, and occasionally video conference. Then in 2018, after returning to his former role as an analyst, an ear, nose, and throat specialist suspected that the employee had a mood disorder. After investigating those suspicions, a psychiatrist diagnosed the employee with severe major depression, anxiety, and panic attack disorder. And so the psychiatrist was concerned that the employee had suicidal ideation, and he prescribed medication to the employee, which improved the severity of his depression. And so that's where the matter gets quite murky. And so the employee claims that the psychological injury diagnosis pertained to the period in which he was temporarily placed on those higher duties while working under remote supervision. And so if you think about the types of hazards and the job demands and situations that Nat was talking you through earlier, that's very analogous to this situation here. And so it's only retrospectively that he realised that he was suffering at the time, is what he says. And so he put a workers' compensation claim in against Comcare for the first 6 months of 2017. Comcare denied financial liability, claiming that psychological injury that was diagnosed in 2018 didn't occur in 2017. And the tribunal had to determine a few things: so whether or not the psychological injury occurred due to personal or work-related matters. That's important. If the timing of the psychological injury occurred when the employee claimed it did, and if the employee had been given reasonable workload and adequate support from his remote manager. And so the tribunal sided with the employee in all of those issues. So although the president presiding over the case was slightly hesitant, noting that the remote working nature of the relationship made things more complicated, that is, the manager might not have been aware the stress his task was causing the employee, that wasn't enough to absolve him of the responsibility to ensure the employee's psychological safety. So essentially, yes, it's complicated, and yes, perhaps there's not all these things that you should have been aware of or might have had a mind to at all those times, but the law obligates you to have been doing those things and to have things in place like regular checkups and other mechanisms in which you were able to identify these issues presenting themselves in the workplace, or how your workplace was contributing to this employee situation, and put things in place to prevent it. And so it really underscores how job design, the work environment, and how those things can create psychological hazards that the business cannot do everything, or in this case, did not do all things reasonably practical to identify and control, and how that turns into a claim that really can damage your business. And so I'll take you through in a moment what they should have done and what the work health safety jurisdiction demands that you do, but really want you to think about how not doing those things can turn into something like that, where if you don't have ways in which to show that you were trying to prevent those injuries happening, you don't have any way to defend these types of claims, because you don't have any basis to suggest you were doing things reasonably practicable, because you can't actually evidence that you were trying to even identify the hazard. How are you trying to identify? How are you trying to control those types of things? And so without frameworks in place to do that, you're going to really struggle. And then when those injuries occur, it just puts you in a really difficult spot, because you can't do a lot to defend yourself as a business. Okay, so practically speaking, Nat took you through the types of hazards that come about, and that case underscored some of them. But practically speaking, what are you required to do in order to comply with your obligations? The image on this slide is, in essence, what the legislation mandates that you must do. And that is, you need to identify the hazards, i.e. find out what could cause harm in your workplace, assess the risk, so understand the nature of the harm that could be caused by that hazard and how serious the harm could be and the likelihood of it occurring. You need to then control the risk, so implement the most effective control measures that is reasonably practical in the circumstances and to ensure it remains effective over time. And then review hazards and control measures to ensure that they are working as planned. And so not only do you need to be able to do, you must do the legislation requires that you must do those 4 things. You must do them. Otherwise, you're non-compliant with the Act, and when an injury occurs, you're at risk. Both, obviously the employee is injured, but also from a compliance perspective, you're at risk. And so you must be able to also prove that you did it. And so I like to compare it to when we used to get maths problems at school. And you need to be able to provide the right answer to get the question right. You also need to be able to show how you got there. You must be able to show it, otherwise the answer is you only get halfway there. So what safe work are going to ask for, or what you're going to need to be able to evidence in any form of claim that we've talked about throughout today's presentation, you must be able to demonstrate or evidence how you did things reasonably practicable to address that risk and therefore avoid liability. And so that looks like you need to be able to show on the screen there, how did you identify the hazards? Is there any type of documentation that demonstrates you went through that exercise? You need to be able to show that you assessed the risk. So did you do risk assessments on that hazard that you identified? And then what were the things you put in place to try and control them? And so what really the purpose of today's presentation and what our service that we're going to be offering everyone a solution through is designed to do these 4 things. So it's designed to help a business through a diagnostic and an audit identify what the hazards are that are present in your workplace, assess the risks, so give you an understanding of how those risks through our report can damage your business, then provide recommendations as well as tools and resources to control those risks. The predominant one of which is the EAP service that we'll be providing through Connect Psych Services. Then regularly review through our advice line the control measures to ensure they're working as planned. So really, this is the fundamental thing you need to get the basics of right in order to protect yourself and your employees. And that's precisely what the solution that we'll be offering you is going to do. And so before I hand it back over to Nat to take you through in a little bit more detail what some of those practical steps are in the workplace and the types of things that you can be doing to help you control these risks when they occur, is just to talk a little bit about safety culture and what that means for compliance. So it's really, culture, I think, has become this ubiquitous and almost overused term in our sphere. But when it comes to managing health and safety, it really is fundamental to create a positive safety culture in your business that overarches, the things that you're doing in your business to protect people. And so you must create a really proactive system that's preventative rather than responding to issues and chasing your tail, because they're the things that actually prevent people getting hurt. But they're also the things that safe work is looking for in the event that there's an issue that occurs. What were you doing to have prevented that? Did you do things reasonably practical? It won't be enough to show that after an incident occurred, you were reactive and you helped people through that injury. It's that you needed to put steps in place to prevent it. And the main thing you can be doing is establishing a culture that sets the behaviour standards and provides a safe workplace and provides, that feeling of safety for all employees at all time. And so your culture sets the standard of how you prioritise the well-being of workers and how you respond to issues and keep them safe and healthy. So if your management and the culture of your business is one of safety and that you prioritise safety, and those types of things can be seen and evidenced, then the more employees and workers feel the culture that's wrapped around that, and the more it kind of flows through everything you're doing in a way that people know that safety is first. It's part of every, in a blue collar work site, the businesses that have a positive safety culture are the ones that are always talking about safety first. Every toolbox they're talking about safety. When it comes to psychological hazards and risks, what are the types of things and the mechanisms you're going to put in place as a business that makes employees feel like their psychological safety and their well-being at work is something that's prioritized by the business? The more you can do that, the more you be naturally able to evidence that you did all the things reasonably practical to prevent these injuries happening. You can't stop all psychological injuries happening at work the same way you can't stop physical injuries happening at work. Accidents happen, but it's about being able to demonstrate that it was an accident, because look at all the things that we do and the focus that we've put on it over time to have tried to do the right thing here. And the more you do that, the more you build a culture of safety, and the more you put yourself in a position where you don't have to worry as much about this compliance risk or people getting injured to start with, because you know you've been doing things reasonably practical. So I just think it's important to always think about that as a priority, rather than get bogged down in the weeds around what are the specific things I need to be doing, and just think about creating a safety first culture in your business, for psychological safety, obviously, and physical, so that everyone feels it, because that's the most practical thing that you can be doing, in my view. And then that flows through everything else that you be doing in a way that protects you as best as possible. Okay, so with that, I'll just hand it back over to Nat, who's going to take you through in a little bit more detail what, practical, robust health and safety management and specific psychological health and safety management looks like.
Thanks, Adrian. I really love that slide, because it really highlights the level of proactivity, but also then just for workplaces they can enact now. Like it's where I like to look at that as a positive slide, that there are simple measures that we can, put in place as business owners right here, right now, that are going to protect your staff. And, I always say to all of our clients that, well-being is a discipline, and being able to embed these initiatives and programs within your workplace, it is going to start to build a culture that can continually build. And the consequence of that is that, your staff are wanting them to stay. But not only that, you've got the retainment of the staff, but then you're going to be able to attract good staff and other staff, because you are going to be that workplace of choice, because, you are known to then look after your workers from that well-being and that safety perspective. So if we look at the, some practical tips and how these hazards can actually be addressed effectively, is exactly what Adrian was saying. The first stop can be an accessible employee assistance program. And this is what Connect Psych actually offer. We're really vital in reducing the psychosocial hazards, and we offer a confidential, flexible and autonomous mental health support. And this is accessed really anytime, anywhere, depending upon how the worker is wanting to be able to connect, whether it's video, voice, live chat, or face-to-face. And we actually offer sessions 7 days a week, 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. Right across Asia Pacific there. So really being able to have that autonomy, that flexibility and that convenience is really important for your workers to access the support when and where they need it. And through our one-on-one counselling, Connect Psych help employees across the whole of the DSM-5, mental health challenges. One of the largest areas we do a lot in stress and anxiety, and vicarious trauma and burnout and fatigue, along with relationships, grief, looking at levels of even the clinical aspects of addiction. And then moving more into those areas of manager support and looking at conflict resolution. So really trying to be able to provide a broad spectrum of knowledge and understanding through our practitioners who are part of the Connect Psych community. They're not subcontracted out. So we have a real element of quality control over all of our practitioners to be providing best practice support. Further to that is that we have a system that allows for that best fit practitioner. So we're really able to gain, that importance of having the workers know who they want to work with, and allowing them to have that autonomy to choose. It really creates a great, strong relationship between our practitioners and the workers, which is really important for rapport building, and then moving into those strategies to build that resilience within them. But in addition to that immediate support, so that's that more sometimes we can look at EAP more so as reactive. Connect Psych really want to focus on the proactivity here, and we do now work a lot with teams, leaders, and also just the employees on really being able to build mental fitness, and along with that mental fitness, that endurance there. So it equips employees with the tools and the strategies to really enhance work-life integration, resilience, and also coping with a lot of the future stresses there. So this is this proactive approach. It not only addresses, the current psychosocial risks, such as high job demands and relationship breakdowns, but also the inadequate role clarity and poor organisation. But it also strengthens the overall well-being of the workplace. And so what we aim to do is really be able to build a workplace that's ready to thrive. We really value relationships with every area. We value our relationship with Citation Group, but we also then value our relationship with each and every workplace, because there is a lot of elements of programs out there, and we understand that sometimes well-being and workplace well-being initiatives, it's a very noisy space. So the reason we love building that relationship is that we want you to be able to come to us with your questions and your challenges. We have that open door policy on our end as well, and allowing you to understand, what is going to be best suited for your team. That's the type of advice we also then like to give. But moving on, from EAP, is some other areas that you can focus on as owners and as SMEs and any business owners here is providing those clear job descriptions along with that structure. Detailing the descriptions that outline the roles and the responsibilities and the expectations. It really helps prevent confusion and stress related to role ambiguity, and also regularly updating these descriptions to reflect any changes, because we do know that, the workplace and roles can evolve, and it ensures that employees always knows what's expected of them. And we're still, even having this in writing, but also coming and having a meeting with that worker and going through this verbally, and then having that clarification. Do I actually, do you understand? Have you got any questions? Is there any concerns? So bringing the employee into that conversation, it just allows for that extra autonomy and control over their job. Involving employees in the decision-making process. And what this does, it allows having the employees allow them to have a say in their roles, and how their roles are structured or how changes are implemented. What it does, it increases that job control and reduces that negative impact of low autonomy. Also, sometimes, it also increases the innovation and creativity of the workplace, because we're hearing what others are saying, and really being able to acknowledge that. For teams and for leaders to provide that transparent communication, so maintaining that open level of communication regarding any organizational decisions and policies and changes. What this does is it starts to build that level of trust, and that's the real foundation of psychological safety. It also then reduces that risk of perceived injustice. So ensuring that all processes such as performance evaluations or any other disciplinary actions are carried out fairly and consistently across the organisation. It contributes to that sense of organisational justice. Also then looking at any policies, and making sure that your policies and justice are very clear and have got fair procedures. This is, especially around the area of managing bullying and harassment, along with discrimination. This allows to create that level of safe work and respectful work for all parties. Regular training and awareness programs around this, it really starts to reinforce those policies. But again, another great way to bring all diversity into the workplace, from the workplace together to discuss this. Leadership and training development is crucial in equipping leaders with the skills to recognise and address the psychosocial hazards. So skills like building leader skills around how to have critical conversations, building empathic and compassionate communication, and then leading with authenticity this really is the crux to being able to create a psychologically safe work environment. So at Connect Psych, we do a lot of work around this, about how leaders can lead with compassion and empathy. And, you know, again, a really proactive and humanistic approach here is important to reducing many of those psychosocial hazards there. Workplace design and job control. It involves really enhancing the job roles by increasing autonomy, again, providing clear responsibilities and effectively managing and addressing workloads, especially potentially in those times where there may be a higher kick up in workload, just due to the type of work and type of industry. So this will reduce that high job demand, and also low job control is that acknowledgement. Making sure that you've got support for remote and isolated workers. And this can be through regular check-ins, again, virtual team building and social activities, and making sure that they have access to the proper support resources. Again, it can mitigate the risks of isolation and also loneliness. And we really want all of our workers to feel connected, and also safe. We then move into the importance of that crisis support, into the second box here. And crisis intervention programs, we want to be able to have these as workplaces to be put in place for responding to incidents of violence and aggression. And it ensures that employees receive immediate support, and the situation is handled appropriately. So this is an area where Connect Psych also can provide this level of support moving forward. And, after these crisis, if a crisis has occurred, regular debriefing sessions after that crisis, because many of the time we could be going through in that workplace that acute level of stress. And once workers start to process, that crisis, it can lead to some unprocessed thoughts, and more often, around a month down the track, if those thoughts are still becoming quite intrusive and starting to impact their work and their daily life, they can start to be diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder. So being able to have those debriefing sessions, especially after challenging and stressful areas occurred, it really helps employees process those experiences and also share their concerns and be able to then receive that support, and allowing leaders to understand which workers might receive some extra support, to be able to reduce that impact of that high stressful situation. Again, we want to be able to build this level of safe community, and being able to allow our community to thrive is through being able to offer continual learning opportunities, and this can be both personal and professional. We know, and our statistics and data show that many of our workers, who are clients who actually are using and working with our practitioners, the reason they've onboarded is because of both work and personal. It's very hard to differentiate where the stress has actually come from. So a lot of our workers are saying, look, it's coming from both areas. So being able to provide, that level of personal development, it does have its benefits in the professional workplace too. And this, it overall enhances employees' skills and boosts their confidence and job satisfaction. But, we want to be able to enhance mental literacy and the solutions. So this is able to reduce the stress related to job demands, and to role uncertainty, but also really encourages that area of self-care, and also empathy amongst other employees, because they can then start to get and gain that awareness of mental health symptoms within their colleagues. Peer support programs have proven to be really, really, really effective, especially in the small, medium businesses, and being able to have those mental health champions, or a well-being worker, it can encouraging those and building out those networks. It encourages employees to be able to confidently or confidentially, discuss their challenges with their other colleagues, and it can really build a sense of community and reduce those feelings of isolation, but also have that element where those champions can then guide them to the right support, such as Connect Psych Services, because we don't expect the champions to be solving the problems and being able to work through some complexity there, but being able to have that first step is imperative to be able to push them into the next step. We obviously had the detailed incident management procedures that Adrian did mention, and that Citation Group do an excellent job at, because we want to be able to make sure that we've got all our reporting procedures and what we've done and that evidence in place. I do like your analogy around the methods and those exams. And I remember also back in the days, Adrian, that was drilled into me. It's like, you can get the answer, but if you haven't shown the working out, you only get half the mark. So don't know what kind of response that reminded me of as well, but it's a really, really, really good analogy. And this is something, if you are having, continual meetings and being able to provide those strategies, being able to note take in appropriate ways, it's going to taking that time to do that is certainly worth its weight in gold. And this is what Citation Group can assist you with as well. Again, from a proactive and humanistic approach, being able to create some formal recognition and rewards programs. Now, how that actually looks to you, everyone's different. There's a bit of a joke at Connect Psych that for every birthday and every year anniversary, the bosses will make a cake, and the cake has to be the choice of the employee, and it's a daggy happy birthday dance, but it's also a little speech about why we believe that they play such an important part. Now, I'm a baker. That's some of my self-care strategies for me, and everyone, I think, reaps rewards in our office, but our workers come up and they just say they just love it. They really believe that this is something that it makes them really feel part of the bigger picture, and it doesn't have to be monetary. Just even to think as owners, what can we actually do that is showing that authenticity and that genuity. And it's also something that's achievable and fair across the whole of the organisation. We don't want to be able to create those feelings of resentment, but something that can be really practical for your workplaces, and having a little bit of fun with it can also then start to create a little bit of camaraderie and community. Again, I'll finish off on a little bit of more serious note here, is that, the violence prevention and response programs, if you are, in those industries where violence and aggression does occur, what programs are you putting in place for individual workers to actually understand that you do enforce that zero tolerance policy for violence and aggression within the workplace. And then that's, internal and external. But having that training on conflict resolution and the safety program protocols is essential, and then to be able to have very clear, immediate responses to incidents to help mitigate any form of further psychological impact. So that was a lot, I know, but I'm hoping I've highlighted many positive and proactive things that workplaces can actually start to create right now, and to get some thinking and some of those cogs turning. I'll pass it back over to Adrian now, just to finish us off.
Thanks very much, Nat. Yeah, and just to back over kind of what the offering is and how we bring all of this together for you, is we really want to be able to provide an easier solution for businesses, particularly SMEs, who quite frankly will struggle to have the internal resources to bring someone in permanently to help manage compliance, not only with your workplace health and safety obligations, but also things like ER and HR and all of your obligations and issues that can arise under the Fair Work Act. And so what we've designed this solution to be is something whereby we effectively give you a platform and all the tools and resources in order to do the things that you need to be doing that we've mentioned in today's session, and in many respects help you to do those things for you. So the audit, the initial sort of diagnostic, if you like. What are the hazards and risks in your workplace? Then provide you a report, recommendations. How should you fix them? And here are a range of tools and resources to fix them, policies, procedures, things that provide the evidence that we've talked about that you need, to sort of show your workings, as we, gave in that maths example, and then give you a lot of the control measures as well. So things like the EAP service through Connect Psych is one of those fundamental control measures that you're going to get asked for if Safe Work inspects you for any of these types of things, and that you need to have in place, not only for compliance, but because it's just it's a thing that employees should rightfully have, in order to have the issues that could arise in their workplace be able to be managed with some clinical support. And so that's, in a nutshell, the service that we're offering, and we'd love to talk to you about how we might be able to deploy that for you. And so if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that, please use the QR code on the screen, and we can take you through that in a lot more detail. So with that, I'll just try to appreciate, in view of time, we don't have the greatest amount of time to answer all of your questions, but I'll try to get to a couple just now that I've seen in the chat box. How does an audit with Citation differ from a visit from WorkSafe or Safe Work? That's a good question. I think the content of both of our reviews is very similar, insofar as our audit, our review, or our diagnostic, if you like, is going to look at the 14 key hazards and risks and the things that the code of practice, being kind of the best practice approach in this space from Safe Work, requires or says that you should be doing. We will review your state of compliance with that and identify all those types of things that you could be doing or that are prevalent in your workplace that could affect you, and will help you sort of through that. Safe Work, either whether it's through a random inspection or through an inspection based on a complaint or an injury occurring, they will be reviewing similar types of things, but they'll be doing it in a way to penalise you or review your compliance from a regulator's perspective. And so the differences is not about the content, it's about the purpose. And the purpose of our diagnostic and our review is to protect you and it's like an internal audit. It's as if someone in your own business was providing you with a report card in order to help the business through those things should an incident occur. Whereas an external review by Safe Work obviously is about the regulator seeking to enforce the law on you in a way that can, result in things called improvement notices and beyond that, penalties and other types of fines and things like that, which are what we're doing. So we're here to help you and to put you in a position to defend those types of things, and obviously Safe Work are to enforce the law is their job as a regulator. Okay, another one. What are the most critical elements of the codes of practice, or what are the most important psychosocial hazards and risks? That's a good question, but I would say that there are no inherent most important hazards and risks or most critical elements of codes of practice. It is about what are the most prevalent hazards to your workplace context. So each workplace is very, very different. A heavy machinery warehouse is very different to an IT office. And so the types of risks that will be prevalent in each one of those offices will be very, very different, and therefore, but equally, not all of those hazards are going to be prevalent in both of those businesses. And so it's important that you do a review and you have someone assist you in identifying what are the ones relevant to your business so that you can focus on those and review, obviously, as you go along, but identify what those are. So there's none that outweigh others. It's about understanding what's relevant to your business and doing the things that control those risks in your business. The last one is WorkSafe. Does WorkSafe recommend EAP services? Yes, they do. I would say that it is something that I've seen most often in improvement notices related to things like workplace bullying, harassment, and other types of issues that have been reported to WorkSafe and that have brought about an inspection from WorkSafe. And often, as part of their recommendations, which are the improvements that WorkSafe is requiring that the business does in order to avoid penalty, they will recommend something like an EAP service as part of a suite of control measures that the workplace needs to improve in or do better for in order to prevent that injury or an injury occurring in relation to that issue. So, yeah, it's not each and every time, but it's pretty accepted as best practice within workplaces generally these days, that to assist in control of psychological injuries, that an EAP service will allow the business to better do that, and therefore it is something that WorkSafe would often mention as something that the business can be doing. Okay, unfortunately, that's all the time that we've got. Really encourage anyone, if there are any questions specifically in relation to this space, to get in touch with us and we can talk through them in the eventual consultation that we have, and more broadly, just to take you through what we're offering in this space and how we can help you move forward. So with that, I'll bring the webinar to a close, and thanks everyone for attending.